afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us here today for this session. The topic of the session today is self-sovereign identity and applications in smart digital economies. Last year, Bhutan became the first country to adopt the self-sovereign identity-based decentralized identity system at a national scale. Today, with the international thought leaders in SSI industry, we will explore the transformative potential of SSI in digital interaction and transaction while driving the digital economics forward. We will explore the principles of SSI, empowering individuals to own and control their personal data. Further, we will discuss the principles that translates to technology and social impacts that benefits individuals and service providers alike. Our panelists will examine the various applications of SSI within smart digital economics, including financial service, health service, e-commerce, and digital governance. We'll also dive into the future prospects of SSI-based national digital identity in context of the upcoming Gelifu Mindfulness City. We are joined today by our esteemed panelists. We have with us Secretary Jimmy Tenzin, who heads the Government Technology Agency in Bhutan. He has worked in IT in the public sector, focusing on the adoption of IT in government, helping to define and shape the path of IT development in the country. He has worked as a system analyst, transforming government systems and also managed technical teams in e-government, innovation and transformation. His skills and experience enable him to guide and motivate the IT fraternity in digital transformation and public services in Bhutan. Next, we have with us Drummond Reed, the Director of Digital Services in Gen Digital. Drummond has spent a quarter of a century in internet identity, security, privacy, and trust infrastructure. He is the co-author of the book Self-Sovereign Identity, I think. And also he's the co-editor of the W3C Standards Identifier 1.0 specifications. At the Trust Over IT Foundation, Drummond is the member of steering committee and co-chair of the Governance Stack Working Group. He also served as co-chair of the Sovereign Governance Framework Working Group. Drummond also served as executive director for two industrial foundations, the Information Card Foundation and Open Identity Exchange. In 2013, he was cited as the Overseas Distinguished Contributor. So we also have Eric Dury, who is the director of fourthco.io and is also the co-chair of Trust Over IP Ecosystem Foundry Working Group. Eric has worked in the strategic research and implementation level as advisor of enterprise organization and individuals seeking to help individuals seeking to understand emerging Web 3.0 technologies. With more than 25 years of experience across multiple industry and continents, Eric's strength includes synthesizing and communicating the advantage of emerging technologies such as digital identity, verifier credential, and blockchain. With this, I'd like to start with Drummond Reed on the opening remark about the topic we have today.
Explaining self-sovereign identity. Oh, thank you. Okay, so read the book. I'm done. This is where I get out my wallet. Yeah, there you go. I find, and I have the audience for a long time, found the simplest way to explain self-sovereign identity is to get out your wallet and say, look, we just want to take all the different ways in which we can both prove our identity, but also transact with our, personal ways of exchanging value, and we need to move it onto this. Now, that's a tremendous oversimplification, but it is still accurate. And since we have 4 of us here, we can talk about the 4 core roles involved in any self-sovereign identity ecosystem. And this is a term that's evolved. We're going to talk a lot about digital trust ecosystems. And I'll give you a very precise definition of what we mean by an ecosystem when you're talking about self-sovereign identity, digital wallets, digital credentials. And that is, for every credential in this wallet, there is an issuer. And we're going to give you an example. I'm going to pretend that I want to be an employee of this fabulous NDI project we've heard about, and that Secretary Jigme here is actually the issuer at NDI, and he could give me such a credential, okay? He would be the issuer. I would then hold it in my digital wallet, and Eric here is going to be the hotel chain that's going to give me a magnificent discount because I am an NDI employee, right? So he's then going to ask me to present a credential just the way he would in the real world, and I would, take something out and I would say, well, here it is, or this, and notice what he's doing. Yes, and right, he checks to make sure it's authentic. He's verifying that credential. That's what we call that rule verifier. Now, somebody had to set up that system and agree on what the rules are. And we'll say that our moderator is that position, and that's what we call the governing body. So if you put those 4 roles together and you decide on what we call a family of credentials, because there may be more than one, that creates a digital trust ecosystem. If you have multiple issuers, let's say we're talking employment credentials, well, now it's an employer or employee ecosystem, can serve all the employees in all those companies. And now all the verifiers who might want to say, oh, you're an employee of a company, I will offer you a travel discount, a buying discount, you qualify for certain things. Now you can start to see the value that is produced by the exchange of that sensitive digital information. That is the essence of what makes it self-sovereign is simply, we never use that term, hey, I got a self-sovereign wallet in the real world. But in the digital world, that's not how anything has worked, right? We always have to go to some central, what term we used in federated identities, an identity provider. First time I ever heard that term, I thought, that's a bad term. Who provides you with an identity, right? But in the federated world, that's how it worked. You go to, Google or Apple or Facebook or whatever, and you set up an account, and now they can prove your identity to someone else. Of course, that means they're also sitting in the middle of all those transactions. That's maybe not the best privacy posture in the world, and maybe not the best relationship management, but that's how it works today. And we've developed federated identity systems because we needed something to make it so you didn't have to create a new username and password at every single site, and they had to manage all the issues when you forgot a username and password, right? So at least federated identity systems solve that pain. But this is the way to get beyond all that, to decentralize it, and do all the things that Secretary Jigme already explained the benefits of in the last panel. So that's my short, but just read the book.
So next I'd like the Secretary
to So building on what Drummond said, as you may already know, Bhutan has a decentralized self-sovereign identity. And what we've been trying to do with that is transform our digital transactions in the country. So one of the first things that we did is looking at all the citizen to government transactions that take place. So e-services or online services is not new to Bhutan. We've been doing it since 2005, if I'm not mistaken. And the approach that we took was we tried to leverage the information that existed in the various government agencies to try and make services easy for citizens to avail. And what we quickly realized is, so the first thing we realized is that the government has a lot of data on citizens, but it isn't actually very accurate, right? When we actually started reusing this information, it came to light that information isn't very accurate. But so we learned from that, and I think that experience gave us the opportunity to really improve the quality of data. And and the next thing that we learned is that when we start reusing information that exists in one agency in government, there is also a high chance that information can be misused. Potential bad actors, although the intent of the system is not that, right? But it gives the opportunity to do that. So with a decentralized self-sovereign identity, the opportunity that we got was transform government services to digital forms, and all the interactions that was necessary across government agencies where information needed to be shared could actually be transferred to citizens, empowering them to decide who they wanted to share this information with. And the reason why I mentioned the earlier part was because now we have taken all of this information that government agencies have and we've actually put it into the citizen's wallet. We now also have the advantage of improving the quality of that data even further. The other area that we are looking at is banking. Banking is another area which is highly sensitive. You need to present yourself. We need to have a high degree of trust before you can open up a bank account where you can start doing transactions. And the earlier approach that we had was you physically present yourself to the bank. We ensure that we know who you are, and then you can build on and manage your online identity which you present to the bank. But the way that we actually manage these online transactions was based on credentials that were issued to the individual. So your username and your password. And the problem with usernames and passwords is that people can steal it and use it on your behalf. And the bank really doesn't know, right? Because there isn't a strong linkage between who you are and your username and password. So we had issues with identity fraud. I mean, we still do, right? They try to actually make online banking transactions more secure by trying to couple it with the device that you carry around, right? So we did two-factor authentications. We started sending one-time passwords to your mobile phone, the number that is supposed to be registered in your name. But again, life goes on, you change your mobile phone, and then suddenly somebody gets access to somebody else's mobile number, and then you have the opportunity to reset your password, and suddenly you have access to somebody else's bank account. So these are challenges that moving to a digital space presents. With digital identity, you have the advantage that you're biometrically tightly linked to your identity, and therefore when you open up a bank account, you know that the right person is behind that. But that again, isn't fully about self-sovereign identity. That's the next phase of it. So how do we move this service completely online? right? I mean, the opportunity that the national digital identity presents to us is that we have a tight linkage with you as a person that's biometrically linked to the identity that you have in your wallet. And you have verified credentials issued by an authorized agency that exists in your wallet. So why is there a need, to do KYCs? Because every agency needs to validate that. But if you have a trusted authority that has already done that, every government agency doesn't have to do it again and again. It's the same concept as providing information to the government once, right? But in this case, it's reversed, because the information that you have in your wallet is a validated credential, and you can actually present it with a high degree of trust that it is who you say you are. And that solves the problem of identity, and you can immediately open up a bank account. And you didn't have to open up security concerns about letting a third party access your information from the issue, as Drummond was explaining. So I'm going on quite a bit, so I'll maybe not cover the medical bit. We can come back.
Maybe we can come back to it. Just ask a question. Yeah. So I'd like Eric with his opening comments.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't in the space of digital identity, we may not have known what digital identity was, because until now we access the internet with a username and password. And it's only recently that we've understood that behind the scenes there are profiles and personas being built with the information linked to our account, to our user emails and our passwords. And that's what a digital identity is. When we're talking about self-sovereign identity, I think it's important to understand it in the context of the response of the pendulum that has swung over the past 30 years of our user accounts, our emails that are not secure. We're being hacked every day, but there's no privacy in our accounts, in our online world, because of the hacks, because of the security, and there's no consent. So the pendulum has swung so far to one side that our online existence is not secure, it's not private, and we're not offering any real consent. And self-sovereign identity is a response to the fact that that pendulum has swung so far to the extreme that self-sovereign identity is saying, no, we need to get the pendulum swinging back this side because we need something more secure, we need privacy, and we need consent, and we need control. So that is that's the context in implementing self-sovereign identity. Is we've got so much momentum being built up over the past 30 years that we need to bring the pendulum back this way. So adopting and implementing self-sovereign identity is a challenge because there's investment and momentum and critical mass so far to one extreme. It's really hard to bring it back to this side, which is what makes what Bhutan has done within NDI remarkable, because they've gone to the other extreme and say, no, there's a different way. We can offer an online digital identity that is secure, that is privacy preserving, and that does offer our users consent. So that's the context. If we're implementing and adopting self-sovereign identity is a big challenge. The other challenge is that when you're talking about self-sovereign identity, you're talking about decentralized. And when you're talking about decentralized, it's individuals. So again, there's no critical mass. And so adoption, you need critical mass. And the interesting thing here is that self-sovereign identity is being adopted by centralized authorities like governments, mostly. That's the biggest use case today, is government saying, we need a digital identity, And we know that we're centralized, but we can adopt decentralized technical and governance principles so that we can offer our citizens more privacy, more security, and more consent. So what I wanted to talk about now is how a few examples of how digital identity is being adopted across the world. And it's important to understand that it's on a spectrum, right? Again, right now we're so far to one side that we're not going to immediately start adopting on this side of the spectrum. We're going to fall somewhere in the middle. So I'll start with in Asia, Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia, and you've got India who's implemented Aadhaar, the national ID. You've got SingPass, you've got Korea with the Korea ID. And it's all government issued national ID programs that are moving more towards self-sovereign, but they're not pure self-sovereign. In Africa, they realized that one of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is that every citizen has the right to exist and has the right to an identity. And so they are adopting national ID programs and deciding to leapfrog and go directly to digital identity rather than issuing the expensive physical ID cards. They're getting a lot of funding from the World Bank, and I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in Ethiopia, who are adopting national ID, digital ID, in Kenya, and both of these examples are based on governance frameworks that have been years in the making, that are addressing privacy, that are addressing consent, and finally getting to the point where they can adopt digital ID. In Europe, in 2026, 27 European member states will have to offer a national ID to any citizen that wants one, January 1st, 2026. And that's in almost less than 14 months, right? So that's going to be a huge national ID program with lots of adoption and hundreds of thousands of wallets all at once. In the North America, you've had self-sovereign principles being used in the Canadian government for verifiable organizational networks. You've had the mining companies that are issuing credentials based on self-sovereign identity principles for to be verified with online. And you've got the Department of Homeland Security that are adopting self-sovereign principles to issue immigration credentials. So there's adoption happening in a lot of different places in the world, but there's a lot of challenges because, again, we need to move the pendulum further this way. So those are some of the examples, mostly national ID, but we can talk about later healthcare, finance, e-commerce, etc.
So my first question here goes to John. So how do you think does the SSI improve upon the currently existing traditional digital economy with regard to e-commerce? So how can we improve on the currently existing way in the smart digital commerce is going on in the world?
Eric started to address that. Thank you. It's on? Okay, good. Any transformation in technology, any new infrastructure has to be driven by incentives that work for at least the majority of the actors, right? So in the four roles we've talked about here, Eric just gave an example of many of the self-sovereign identity initiatives out there. Of the four actors, the most active is the governing body, right? The governments. And again, we're going to highlight over and over again the NDI program here in Bhutan because it's the most enlightened government saying, hey, we can solve a bunch of problems for our citizens by moving to decentralized self-sovereign identity, digital credentials, digital wallets. But they're only going to be successful, I believe, in the end, and I've talked to many of the NDI members about this, if in fact the incentives line up for the issuers And the verifiers, I'm going to say, I'm putting holders last, because if the issuers are going to issue and the verifiers are going to verify, and it's all going to work on the government, the holders are going to come, right? The example you can always look back to, and we've talked a lot about, and we'll talk more about in the Global Acceptance Network session tomorrow, is credit cards, right? Credit cards had to go through this whole thing, right? We had cash, and then we moved to electronic transactions enabled by credit cards, and they had to solve that same chicken and egg problem. They had to get issuers, but unless they had merchants out there willing to take those cards. So then it got very granular. The early banks, Bank of America in the US was after that. What was their incentive? Their incentive, interestingly enough, was loans. That they could make money on credit card balances, and they could actually move more money through their systems, which is how banks make money, right? What were the incentives for the merchants? Lower friction in transaction, over time, automatic credit that the merchant didn't have to offer because it's coming from the bank, and convenience, speed, right? We've taken what was a credit card swipe and now in many cases just a tap, right? Huge, and of course it also, the other thing it did is enabled remote commerce. Back then, mail order and now online shopping, it's all based on that, right? So you had those incentives, and you had then government regulation. In the US, credit cards didn't take off until the government stepped in and said, we're going to cap liabilities on fraud, right? All the actors conspired, consumers, we poured in, right? So the same thing has to happen here now. And when it comes to self-sovereign identity, it's interesting. At Trust Over IP, we just are publishing the second edition of what we call our technology architecture specification. In the first edition, we said, oh, there's a use cases section, but we'll just concentrate on technology. We'll save the use cases. We actually handed it over to your, to the Ecosystem Founding Working Group. So you guys are talking about use cases all the time. You drafted. And they came back and they had this list of I can't remember how many were on there, but we were like, oh my gosh. But you were like, yeah, but we don't have the time. We're too busy on stuff. You guys fill it in. Eventually that job landed with me and a handful of us. And it's like 6 pages. We had to stop at 30 different examples of how, and NDI, I just, we were with the NDI team, and what is it, something like 120 different cases. That's just most of them involving interactions with the government, let alone all of what things can happen. So the incentives are not just you can't just sort of go 1, 2, 3, security, privacy, convenience. You have to get down to individually what, in banking, in KYC, in healthcare, in travel. Travel is a very strong one because it involves cross-border, and they're dying to get friction out. Airlines will spend millions of dollars to cut 5 or 10 seconds out of the wait of an airline passenger getting onto a plane. So they're coming, but it really depends on the use case, and we can start talking about specific use cases where that will matter. I'll stop there.
Thank you, John. So my next question goes to Dr. Secretary. So with the NDI's context, what do you believe is the industry or sector that you believe is the most promising for widespread adoption of SSI, which would result in the intended economic development?
We talked about this earlier, right? I think the easiest, at least in my opinion, the easiest industry that we could target is banking. I mean, there is already a lot of fraud. The regulators are saying that we really need to increase KYC requirements. We need to protect citizens from all of the spoofing attacks, all of which is because we don't have a strong identity. We are actually dependent on something that we link our identity, right? I mean, if you can eliminate the possibility or the need for, let's say, resetting your password because by using your mobile phone, you don't even need. You don't need to reset your passwords anymore because you have it's your biometrics that's actually linked with your identity, and that is what is used to access your accounts, and I think to me that's an easy use case, and it makes life easier and safer for everyone. I think another interesting use case is medical. Bhutan is right now working on our electronic patient ID system. So in Bhutan we have the state essentially operating all our government facilities, and when citizens actually go from one hospital or from one doctor to another doctor, right now it's largely dependent on what the doctor says, right? The doctor says, okay, go and see that specialist, go and see this other doctor, and it is through a centralized system. Although there's a complexity in terms of raising greater awareness and all of that, but if we give patients greater control over their medical records, would that not create a greater trust in the digital system? And I think if we can achieve greater trust, then the added value that opens up can be quite significant. So I thought I'll just add that as well.
Eric, just continuing from what Tasu mentioned. So also, from the use cases, right now we have, when we're talking about digital economy, smart digital economy, we have these big economic giants which actually thrives on the user data, and the giants we cannot neglect when we talk about larger context of digital economy. So for them to come on board, what do you think is how difficult is it? Of course, I can see the difficulty when asking the question that for them to adopt the SSI philosophy, where the user has the consent to their own data. So what needs to be done or changed for the big players like Amazon and I don't know, Flipkarts from India? So what needs to be changed for them to adopt SSI, or do you see a big battle going on for the adoption?
Yeah, the adoption. What I've thought about the adoption for the big, for anybody, is that the entire internet economics are built on advertising and scraping data and gathering data, and that's the economic model. So you have to change the economic model. The other thing is, when we started in the internet almost 30 years ago, it was, we need to get eyeballs. We need people to come to our website and we need to interact with them, and then we'll figure out who they are. But 30 years later, we know who they are. We can just ask them. And I think if you get to a point where you come to an agreement and say, we'd like to know more about you, and with your consent, you share that information, I think people are willing to share that information and say, you don't have to go behind my back to find out who I am. I'll be happy to tell you if you offer something of value. If you offer a service of value, I'll be happy to share my information. And if you only use it for that purpose, the problem is I can't after 30 years, we still can't trust that they'll only use that information for that very specific purpose, and they won't resell it or they won't keep it, right? So the first thing is, I think that there's an opportunity to say, yeah, we'd like your information and let's do an agreement. The other thing is the monetization. I think with microtransactions today, that economic model might be able to change, because right now, if we are able to do fractions of pennies for transactions, that might make a dent in the economic model that is pervasive in the internet today.
So now we're getting to something that's really exciting. I mean, I don't want to say this is all exciting, good luck, but I love to point out, and we talk about this more and more at Trust Over IP, that again, you think credit cards, just paying for something, that wasn't transformational because you had a way of paying for it. It was transformational to be able to do it so quickly or at distance, right? Well, what Eric's just got onto is, if you think what credit cards did, and any form of electronic payment, was it made it really easy and almost instantaneous to move value, okay? But one specific thing, you can move value, right? And what we're unlocking here with digital identity, with digital credentials and wallets and the whole SSI paradigm, is moving any form of verifiable data, right? Anything. Because you can make a credential out of anything, and you can actually also use credentials to authorize the exchange of other data, right? You're not going to put all your health record, all your x-rays and everything, your life history on your mobile wallet. It's going to be someplace, whether it's at the provider or at a digital vault, and you need to be able to say, yes, doctor, you can get all of this. So to Eric's point, once we have that information available, if we can share that easily, the economics change, because right now, it's the economics all favor the largest providers in the world. That's why big tech is big tech. They can monetize that data. We as individuals can't. But businesses that are now saying, okay, A, we're gonna get left out of that game if we're not the big tech. B, there's huge privacy issues around that and associated security issues. If there was a way that we could transact directly, that what we need to know to serve you, that data, fresh from you, from your wallet, it can even be location sensitive, context sensitive, all of that is available directly to the business in real time. The economics change completely. Now the business doesn't have to go to a data broker or through a big tech. They can work directly with you. And they can get it at a lot less cost. Now the thing is, how are they going to, you're essentially going to go, if you can serve me, are you going to charge them? They're going to offer you something, right? So what's being spent on advertising is now going to move over to incentives to end users to do that. And what we're seeing is also, well, the issuers of the credentials that let you prove you're really valuable, they now have an incentive to get paid for that verifiable data. And that's what we're putting in place with things like the Google Acceptance Network. So I think we're putting in place what's necessary to actually shift the economics of the internet. And to your question, the big tech companies, they're going to be the last who want to see that change, right? They're not going to jump on board to this model until they have to. And I think they will have to. They won't have any choice. But they're not going to be first.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a big white elephant in SSI's work when we come to digital economy.
Oh, believe me, it's already here.
I have a question for both of you. Sorry to jump in, but like you were saying, Drummond, big tech is going to be last. We're already seeing a movement of big tech trying to do the right things in some of the areas. And to what I was saying earlier, if we can move to a situation where there is a lot of trust to the end user, maybe you can add on to the added value that can be generated, which maybe at this stage, historically, the amount of years that Facebook took to monetize, it's probably one of the reasons why they're concerned about not, using data, but they are doing a lot in terms of privacy management. They are trying to do a lot in terms of giving authority to end users, among other things. But what is the added value that big tech would get access to?
The added value of by adopting SSI?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if by adopting SSI, and let's not even say just SSI, right? I mean, by adopting systems that significantly increase the trust between end users and service providers. So going back to my example about medical data, like you said, we are not actually talking about keeping medical data in our wallets, but we are keeping credentials that authorize access to medical data. So if we can put in place systems that give you access to a lot more medical data that right now is restricted and limited because of the concerns that we have on trust, what added value can you get? Right? Could that be a incentive to push big tech into this area?
I'll just say quickly that I think that the value is going to be in the personalization. So if you can give accurate and personal data and you trust that data to be used in a trustworthy manner, then you're going to get much more personalized service. And that's what every company is trying to say. We want to serve this person, and if we only knew what that person wants, then we could develop a strong relationship with them and loyalty and all that. And I think by having this trusted relationship and sharing information, then you're giving them the avenue to provide the most valuable personalized service that you can. And we know that with our wallets and AI agents that are coming, I think by these big companies are, they're investing gazillions into AI, and I think if they can use that AI as a proxy for them, talking to your AI and have those two AIs talking to each other and just giving you the information you need at the time you need it, the service you need at the time you need it. That's been the holy grail for the past 30 years, and I think that's where we're going. And I don't think it's any more than that, but what more can you offer than what the person wants? And I think if you know what they want, that's what they're striving for.
You raise a really good question, and it's going to go further down this theme that the real, when it comes to, call it economic transformation, that we talk about SSI and we talk about the wallet and the credentials, but I believe what it really is the trusted channel. That what you have, and Eric just said, it's not that you just have a wallet and a set of credentials and a way to prove, and your other data, accessible now by that way. It's that you have an agent, whether it's mobile or cloud or hybrid. And my company, Gen, is one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world. We provide agents today. They're there to protect your device and monitor for viruses and malware and other things. My company has realized, and that's why we have a digital trust services division. Oh, that agent could do a lot more for you if it has access to a digital wallet credential and can form that trusted channel with any business. So, to your question, Secretary Jigme, what I like about that trusted channel, besides the trust, the privacy, the security, the convenience it's going to do, it's going to level the playing field. Big tech is today the mediators of trust on the internet. That's why the bigger they get, the more they're in that position. With decentralized technologies, and it's harnessing cryptography for everyone. That's what decentralized identifiers are about and all that. Now every business can have that trusted channel. You can have it with your coffee shop, right? With your local school, with your family members. Now all the businesses can access that. They can all access the data, and what big tech's going to have to do is figure out, well, we've got all this, take their current advantage and figure out, well, now how are we going to take advantage of the trusted channel? And some of them, they're already leaning in that direction. I'm on the board of the Open Wallet Foundation, none of the big tech companies joined when we started that, and then Google came on board. So far, they're the only one, and maybe there'll be others coming soon. Part of it, Jacques actually one of the board member, I can't remember what you call the position for the Open Wallet Foundation, excuse me, Open Wallet Forum, which is getting announced at the Global DPI Summit going on at the same time in Cairo, because governments care a lot about this, and this trusted channel is fantastic, every place. So they want to see that, in particular in the EU, it's not big tech that can take advantage of all of them. That they're basically saying, you have to do what we put in place for our wallets and our citizens, and you must accept them, or you will not be able to do business in our jurisdiction. That's how strongly they feel about it. So I think it's going to be very leveling technology, and with that trusted channel, many, whole new piles of value will get unlocked.
I just wanted to add to that it does seem difficult to compete with the giants, but if you compete on trust, then you're at the same level, right? And you can compete on trust if you adopt these principles, these technologies, and you're immediately at the level of the big guys, because they don't have what you have. They don't have our trust. They spent 30 years deleting our trust, and so now you can start where they are, and you've got a fighting chance.
So, Drummond, I thought I'd get you to also talk about what we talked in our earlier panel, because online advertising and monetizing it isn't bad, right? I mean, there's a lot of value. I mean, I like the fact that something out there knows what I need, understands my preferences, and gives me access to information which reduces the amount of time I spend looking for what I need. I mean, that is a service, and that's value that's provided to me. What I have concerns for is the information that is required to do that is used for something else, right? So we can still have an ad monetizing system in the self-sovereign ecosystem. It just requires actors to behave. and you mentioned a very interesting idea of validating these, the trustworthiness of companies. I was hoping you'd speak more on that.
Oh. We'll get into that, and this is a preview for the session tomorrow on the Global Science Network. But yes, we absolutely want companies competing on trust.
Yeah, it's a very interesting chain of thoughts that we are gathering, but since we are short in time, I'll just get one question from the Slido that we have, and I'll get one question from the floor. Or should we start from the floor and we'll go back to the Slido? So,
I don't need a mic, thank you. Again, thank you, this is really great, and I'm sorry I missed most of it, but I think it's good to sort of segue from the question that Secretary GB just, or the point he just made, because, again, maybe I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, but early on, he had mentioned, I appreciated that in his earlier session, that, even agencies, if unchecked, can be bad actors. And now, I'm putting this in the context of this experience I had in the US, where when you're at airports, there's this now they have these digital booths that have popped up, right? And I get that Clear is one of these companies, a private company that's been given the ability to use biometrics, right? Now, I started talking about agencies, query how they got there in the first place, how they were able to put their booths up there. I've seen this in Delhi as well, where Digiyatra is there, right? And it creates an almost automatic incentive when you're in this massive long queue that does the manual check, and then you have this fancy machine there, and sometimes because certain airlines are already starting to use tech to do the measuring, you almost assume this is part of it, that you can't cross gates unless you do this. And they aren't, the small print, it's hard to read sometimes, right, where you're told what else you're signing off, in this grand bargain, which you don't know you're making. Now, I think the point I'm sort of trying to get at is about this awareness of, what you're really signing up for. And I feel this is, generally it exploits the ignorance or the lack of awareness of the average user, right? Now, I'm a lawyer, and ignorance of law is not a defense in a court of law. But in certain scenarios, right, you don't have the wherewithal and all the information to make the decision. There are times when I almost got into these lines, It's just because I read somewhere, I was told somewhere that once you make your scan, your data is in there, you don't know where it goes, right? And it's also about this misuse by private companies, and especially in the US, of course, a lot of leeway has to be given to private companies to do R&D and develop and all that, right? And so that's why we have great technological advances, but at the same time, there's a lot being given. Yesterday at the session here, we were also talking about how it took 12 years to find out what Facebook was doing and all of that, and now it's even easier to exploit all of this, right? So, in your views, for the panel, like how can we address this? Because the average user, even when we have our phones, there's so many things, right? In fact, the DHI app for BIF, when I saw that there was an app, I almost downloaded it, but then thanks to Apple telling me now, right, this sort of information is being used, I refuse to use it, because it's like, why? Why do you need X, Y, and Z information when all I need is a schedule, right? And so I didn't use it. So, but then there are many others who wouldn't think to look at that because that awareness isn't there. So how do we address this sort of space,
Well, I'll start by saying that a lot of times we point to big tech as the evil people, but we as users are equally responsible, because I know, especially in the West, we are very quick to trade our privacy for convenience, right? So we've got a role to play in this, and I think that it's up to the companies who have made trust and have made transparency and who've made these their core values. They've got a big job to do to say, these are our unique selling propositions, this is what we're about, and we're going to do our best to really adhere to these values. And it's part of their brand, it's part of who they are, and they need to do the marketing, the awareness, and then they need to live by that, right? Because even if we say that, even if the company says they won't be a bad actor, it's really difficult to verify, right? And we're talking about trust. Trust is human, trust is earned, and it needs to be repetitive. You need to do it again, again, and again, and again. So I think if you're a company who really embraces these values, then that's part of who you are and who you project. But then again, the responsibility on the users is to choose this company and say, I'm going to give up these other guys who've been giving me so much convenience for so long, and I'm going to try a different path. And to understand that there are different paths, and that's one of the big challenges that we have, is to advertise that there is a different way. Up to now, I mean, these principles and these standards and protocols have been maturing. They're now at a point where they exist. They're a national digital identity program. They're in operation. So now it's not just something in the future. It exists now, and more and more companies that adopt these values, the more options that the users will have.
Yeah, I see another hand is going up, but I still want to. Can I finish answering that question? Maybe it'll line the next one. Is that okay? You're an attorney, right? Okay, so you and everyone else in the room, pop quiz now. How many of you have read the entirety of the privacy policy of a site that you've been to in the last year? Yeah. Okay. That illustrates the tremendous asymmetry in power there is, and the lawyers in the room know it better than anyone, between the companies, any size company really, and you as an individual, okay? So, comes with self-sovereign identity. It's actually on the inside cover of the book. This one. Yes, there it is, okay. This, don't look, you don't have to look too closely. It's a trust RP stack, and all you have to take away is there are two sides to it. One side's technology, the other side is governance. Governance. The superpower that's now coming with SSI is governance frameworks. We will no longer, as individuals, have to be on the other side. It's highly asynchronous relation. We can choose companies that join an ecosystem that has a governance framework that we agree with. And the governments can actually help out in saying, hey, here's the kind of governance frameworks we'd like to see. Maybe even have certification programs for those. Suddenly, we can level the privacy and you know, the asymmetry in data exchange, and really start to restore privacy on the internet. So, and we invite all the lawyers who are interested to come and participate in the governance stack working group at Trustworthy. How's that for a pitch?
Yeah, just I think Dr. Secretary, when he mentioned that he doesn't mind having ads come because it simplifies things. But I think in terms of privacy, we still need to think about the individuals, give us the choice whether we want to have the ads or not. Because for the longest time, even in Bhutan, telecom, for example, in the early days, the default mode was, when I bought a SIM card, if I buy a SIM card here, I get pinged every second. Then I call them, they say, sorry, that's the default mode. I said, you have to change the default mode. The default mode is no advertising, let us decide what we want. But trust and trust, I think, I think over here, I think it's great that we have SSI happening, but what are we doing in Bhutan to ensure that users, are a little bit more informed and better educated to handle this? Not all of us are well educated enough. And our society, we trust each other so much, orally. Oral society would believe everything. My neighbor tells me there's 100% trust. But, on the phone and when we sign up for services, we don't really know. And I feel that even with SSI, eventually, if we're going to be using all our digits and our eye prints to get into anywhere, I'm not sure. We need to be better informed. What are we going to do to ensure that parents, young people, people on the farms, understand what it is that we're signing up for so we can make that choice? Sometimes I feel in Bhutan we're just driven by technology. All of us want the latest phones, we put everything out there and then we get scammed. We're seeing a lot of it now. So I'm just asking, what are the basic minimum? I'm asking the three panels. What do we need to do so that, while we benefit from technology, we are also preparing ourselves as we go along?
Yeah, thank you. And I think this kind of links to what you mentioned as well. Yes, it is individual responsibilities to be aware of the law, but I think it also, like you mentioned, it's the responsibility of governments to educate people and make them much more aware of the risks and what needs to be done. And this opens up so many degrees of complexity, right? Because you have a spectrum of people. We need to figure out how we educate the uneducated, at least in terms of digital safety, and then we have technologists who needs to be educated from Web 2 to what Web 3 essentially is. And then going to what you mentioned about Apple providing you information about privacy, right? That this app is essentially trying to get this information. So the state that we are trying to move with SSI is platform agnostic, right? Independent of whether you use Apple or whether you use, Android or Windows or whatever it is, the government is issuing you a platform, an identity platform that will tell you this. Because whenever you interact, it's not dependent on the device or whether the manufacturer has values on privacy. We are essentially trying to give you an identity that forces everybody to inform you that this information is being asked for this service, and this significantly simplifies. I argue that it eliminates the complexity of educating uneducated people, but it significantly signifies the complexity of educating somebody, because we can even go to the extent of saying, look, if you apply to a system and then you have a pop-up, it means that this agency wants something from you, right? I mean, it simplifies the advocacy that we need to do. So, but I totally agree. It is also the responsibility of state to educate our citizens.
I just want to add, thank you for the question. It's a huge amount of awareness and education that's needed. There's also a trend of reintroducing friction. So for the last 30 years, it's been reduced friction. We just want people to sign up, get in, use it, and go, and not think. And especially in the financial industry, we've seen the trend that they're saying, no, we need to add a few roadblocks. We need to reintroduce friction to say, wait, are you sure you know who you're sending money to? Wait, are you sure that this is a legitimate contact? And I think that we know that this is one of the biggest challenges in SSI is the user interface and the user experience, and finding out the best way to help the user understand that they're doing things a little bit differently, and this is not just the same, because technology can be it is mostly invisible. And so you kind of want to give them a little clue to what's happening behind the scenes to say, this is different. It's not just what we've been doing for the last 30 years.
I think there's another really important point you guys missed though too with this, is that, and if you could talk on this, it would be great. This is not just a consumer app that's being stuck in someone's hands, and the wallet that we've been talking about is actually sitting on a broader sea of personal data, personal information management system. But Eric, you brought up earlier this like change in business models. But it's not even about the change of business models, it's about a change of industry structure. Because with governments like what Bhutan is doing, we're putting in place public-private good infrastructure. And what was formerly multi-billion-dollar industries in control of private organizations is now free. So that foundational identity coming from a government is now free. And so what does the industry now do in reaction to something that they used to get billions of dollars for?
But our emails are free as well, right? So I think it's not that it's free or maybe.
But
We are going dangerously.
Yeah, but I think that's an important point to bring up, right? Is that
Structural, I think digital public, yeah.
So I'll get the last comment from German on this thing, and then so maybe we need a part 2 of this session next time.
I know we need to wrap up. I'm going to give another promo for the session we'll have tomorrow on the board of Justice level. But I'll go straight to that question and say there is something coming from SSI, decentralized identity, to directly address that question of awareness and trust decisions that have to be made by individuals. That is called digital trust marks. And you have to come to tomorrow's session to understand how important digital trust marks will become that we're enabling here.
and German, that's here at 3 tomorrow.
Oh yes, 3 o'clock, same bat station, the same yeah, no, 3 o'clock here in this, I think in the same room, right? Okay, great, yes. Well, we're making an important announcement there that I guarantee you won't hear anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, so it's thank you everyone for your engagement. I am sorry that we could not get the questions from the sliders. I would like the questioners to directly interact with our panelists if you want to get something more in detail. And I'd like to thank our panelists also for the very detailed and thoughtful discussion. I think we engaged in it over time. Thank you everybody.